Hello. Welcome to The Writer's Dream. We're going to do something different today. Today, we're going to interview Linda Maria Frank. She's usually the interviewer, but I'm going to be the interviewer today. Linda will be talking about her books, all of them. Linda, go.
Don't forget, we're still on Facebook. If you want to message us, you can message us through the Writer's Dream Facebook page. We are still on YouTube, but on YouTube, you have to look for me, Linda Maria Frank. Click on my picture, and you can see videos of about 200 interviews. And so if you're interested in writing a book or just reading books, there's a lot of great information, and most of the authors are local. So there's a lot of talent here on Long Island. We're also on Cablevision on Thursday, channel 115 at 2:30. Thank you, Mary, for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always been a dream of mine to interview an author.
Really?
So
Well,
I get to do it.
go for it.
First, I want to know, how did you decide to become a writer?
Well, I think basically these are things that evolve. It wasn't an aha moment. I didn't one day wake up and say, I shall write a book today. When you're a teacher, as you well know, you write an awful lot. Even though I'm a science teacher, people don't think of science teachers as writers, but you write curriculum, you write lesson plans. And one of the things I did was I used to like to write little stories for my students, and they would have to solve the mystery or the problem or whatever it was. And one day I was sitting in the library, I had library duty, and we had a librarian who really didn't like the kids in the library. So it was very peaceful, and it was snowing out, and it was cozy in the library, and I was writing a story about art forgery for the kids, and I said, this would make a great book. And also, someone in my past had said to me that I was a good storyteller, so I thought to myself, I'm going to try writing a book, and I did.
Okay. How did you get, I think this is the most interesting thing to me, is how do you put the book together from the idea to the final product of the book?
Well, basically, I started with taking a course in writing novels because I said to myself, well, you can tell a story, but you don't know anything about writing a book. So I took a course through it was a correspondence course. You would say, now it would be on the internet, then it was through mail. And so I learned the elements of writing a book, but the way I write, my writing style is because it's a mystery and everything has to make sense. I use a flow chart. I use one of those huge Post-its, and I go chapter by chapter. And a lot of writers don't do this. They just let the story evolve, but that's not my style. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just not my style. And so this enables me to know when to introduce certain plot elements, and especially in a mystery, clues. When are they introduced? When does the main character figure them out? And how do they all dovetail at the end? So it's like a chapter by chapter, but then it's a flow chart. I follow each clue. I could do it in colors,
Oh,
so
okay.
that's how I make a book. But
Yeah, because it always seemed to me that it would be so complicated to get all of that stuff right, but obviously the flow chart must work.
yeah, it's a device. I mean, I don't know how people can keep track of things if they don't write them down, if they don't have some device to follow the clues, because you can't. A person who's reading a mystery should be able to figure out the solution to the mystery by themselves by the clues the author leaves in the book. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll see an interview with an author and they'll say, well, you should have seen this, and you go back and you read the book and you realize it's like that movie The Sixth Sense, where there were so many clues to show you that the man was dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you don't figure out. It's a big shock at the end. So you have to do that too. You have to keep that in mind. And you can't put things in all of a sudden that don't really make sense in the whole plot. You have to be very careful that it all makes sense. So the flowchart's a device.
Yeah, okay. Now, settings of your books. I noticed something that I think it's 4 out of 5, might be all 5, that are on islands, except for Fairy Chimneys.
Yeah,
It's
Fairy
the only one
Chimneys
that
internal.
isn't.
Turkey.
What made you decide on these settings?
Well, the first book in the series, in the Annie Tillery series, is The Madonna Ghost. The Madonna Ghost takes place on Fire Island. Um, I At that time, I wanted to make a story that included things about Long Island history, facts about Long Island history. I wanted to make sure that the story included um, some scenes about sailing, because I did have a sailboat at one time, and I kind of wanted to capture that before I forgot how to sail. And I also wanted to capture what it was like to fall in love for the first time. So those were the themes that I wanted to put together. Now, I was a volunteer at the Fire Island Lighthouse, and so I learned quite a bit of history about Fire Island, and Fire Island has a fascinating history. It's shipwrecks, storms, smuggling, piracy, all manner of crimes. During the Prohibition, it was smuggling liquor. Now it's smuggling drugs. But then I was looking for something a little bit better than drugs, and I thought to myself, because this was right after the first World Trade Center bombing, I said, smuggling explosives. So that became the story. The story became about, and I'm not supposed to say this because it's a surprise at the end of the book, but the story became the ghost hiding a plot about terrorism. So, and of course, I taught forensic science, so the science part of it was easy. So research in that book was relatively easy because of my work at the lighthouse and because of forensic science. But then I had to go and it's when you're writing a book, have to get the street signs right, because somebody's going to read the book and say,
Yep.
that's really wrong. That intersection doesn't exist. So you want to be accurate, and so that's why I picked that setting. And what's more beautiful than Fire Island? What's more romantic than a summer vacation on an island with beautiful beaches and a handsome boy that you meet? So, and that's when I created the perfect boyfriend. Haha, Tyler Egan. And Girl with Pencil Drawing takes place in Manhattan, which is an island. Okay, well that's where Annie lives with her aunt, and so that's why that island. And Secrets in the Fairy Chimneys is actually an archaeological dig in internal Turkey, no islands.
And you went to Turkey, correct?
I did, and I did all the research for this book, and it was fascinating. Turkey's a fascinating place. The Mystery of the Lost Avenger. It's World War II history, which took place on Long Island. I mean, it's the history that took place there.
Yeah.
So again, it's the island. I guess I'm just an island girl. Right? You can't
Well,
really.
you were born on one, so.
Yeah, you can't get away from it. My son calls this whole area the New York archipelago,
Oh, yeah.
because there are so many islands here. I mean, even around Long Island, there's Gardiner's Island, Robbins Island, and so on and so forth.
Now, you talk about the setting and how it kind of, the characters sort of came from it. Can you talk a little bit about, there are several characters that keep moving through all of the books. Annie and Ty and her
Right.
aunt Jay and Lieutenant Red and her father and all of those. How does that work?
Well, first of all, I feel as a writer that the setting you choose, you can work it two ways. It should be invisible, because you want the plot and the characters to stand out. But I like to make the setting a character. And as far as creating characters, I wanted a heroine. I wanted first person viewpoint.
Right.
And so I created Annie Tillery, and then came the boyfriend, and then they couldn't exist all by themselves. And of course, I had to give Annie an entree into the world of crime. So what better way to do it than having her live with an aunt who is a New York City police detective. So not only does she know the aunt, but she knows some of the aunt's colleagues. And also her father works for the State Department, which comes in handy at times. And although she is not, recognized by them as a full-fledged detective, she picks up a lot of information, and when she's in trouble, she calls on them. The other characters in this particular book are Alice. Alice is the historian, the island historian, and she's also um, the expert on the ghost. Okay, so I created the ghost. The ghost is not a real ghost. In other words, not part of any Fire Island mythology. I created her.
Yeah.
And the inspiration for her was, and she is a character, the inspiration was a picture in the Fire Island Lighthouse Museum of people standing in line at, I guess it was maybe Salvation Army table because they were shipwrecked. And they were taken off the ship and they're being given hot beverages. It's cold weather. And I thought to myself, you know, knowing the history of Fire Island, wouldn't it be interesting if I created a ghost that was a mother with her children coming to join the father who had come to America and set up, you know, a home for them and then called to have them come from Europe. And so since she was a mother, I called her the Madonna Ghost. The other character who finds his way through not all of the books, but some of the books, is Doc Egan. And Doc Egan is Tyler Egan's uncle.
Right.
And these are all people who have connections somehow to something that will help Annie. Doc Egan he's a retired CIA officer. So these are all people who kind of know things about crime and criminals. And we learn early in the book that there are people renting the cottage next door to Doc's cottage where everybody's staying, who really are carrying on in a most suspicious manner.
Yeah.
So that's,
Now, I know a lot of people ask this question, so I'm going to ask it too. Are any of your characters based on real people?
just Doc.
He's the only one.
He's the
Okay.
only one. All the rest of them, I mean, you could say that Annie is probably a composite of all my female students. 'Cause I taught in
Oh,
high school and
interesting.
college, so.
Yeah.
And Tyler is actually my creation of the perfect boyfriend, okay? Because I watched the girls that I taught pick some Lulus, and in my own life picked some Lulus for boyfriends. So I figured, let me create what I think is a real role model for boyfriends. So yeah, it was fun creating the characters.
Now, another question that I have is, how do you manage to incorporate, or you incorporate so much stuff on forensic science and science in general and history? You've done a lot of research here. How do you incorporate that in a way that doesn't make it boring or preachy?
I think what you have to do with information in a book, especially for young readers, now you have to realize that when I wrote these books, I was targeting them to teenagers. And since I've been marketing them, I find that they really are attractive to two readerships, and one is, I would say, middle schoolers and old ladies like me who like a short, sweet mystery. So what you have to do, I think, even if you're, you know, writing for an adult audience specifically, is the information that you put in has to be vital for you to understand the story. So, for instance, if I'm telling you how, let's say, an arson crime is investigated, I have to put in there a clue, something about the crime scene, the arson scene, that is pertinent to the story. And so I'm explaining actually how you process the crime scene and what the significance of that piece of evidence is, but that piece of evidence is a clue, is a very important clue. And the same thing is true with history. Why is Fire Island a place where smuggling can occur? And then you have to talk about the history of storms and sandbars and shipwrecks and all that kind of stuff. So it has to be something that the reader needs to know.
Yeah, but you managed to do it in such a way that it's succinct. You don't give too much information.
Because of my readership. I mean, if I were writing for an adult audience, I could prattle on for some time and not worry about it. But
Right,
if you're
but-
writing for kids, they have, they have a limited attention span. One hopes that adults have a better attention span, but we don't always know that. As I said many times, I have three objectives, and that's actually to teach something in my books. I hope you learn something, and to create characters who are lovable, and to turn the pages.
Well, I think you've actually accomplished all three. I
Well-
know I've learned stuff from reading your books, and certainly they are page turners, absolutely. And I'm one of those old ladies in your second audience, so I really enjoy the books as well.
Yeah, when you get to the end of the chapter, you have to say something that makes you, I have to go on to the next chapter. So that's,
Yeah.
that,
Now,
that,
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
How do you wrap up the books in a way? I mean, Deus Ex Machina comes to mind. That kind of thing where all of a sudden the thing gets wrapped up, and you're like, huh? How did that happen? You don't do that?
well,
So how do you wrap them up?
first of all, you have to solve the case. So once the case is solved and uh, who the bad guy is, or you arrest the bad guy, or you've solved the riddle, okay, then the other consideration, I mean, you could end it right there, but the other consideration is the characters. I mean, how do they feel about the end of this story? And so in the Madonna Ghost, I have a little ceremony where they send the ghost off. They send her to a peaceful place. And then sometimes I have the characters come together in a little party, and what happens in the party is a phone call happens or a letter happens, and it opens up the next mystery. In Secrets in the Fairy Chimneys, there's a romantic ending. Okay, so I always end it with the characters. I mean, the case is solved, and the case is solved with action, and whatever details need to be tied up, I do. But I try to do that quickly, but then I have to pay attention to the characters. And the same thing is true with The Mystery of the Lost Avenger, which The Mystery of the Lost Avenger is probably the most emotional of the 4 books. It takes place in 2 times, in World War II in 1943 and in the present, and there is a connection. Again, there's a ghost. There's a ghost in the story. There's a romance. There's a mystery. And there's a tie between the characters of the past, the most important of whom is Annie's great-great-grandmother, who was a war service pilot during World War II, and Annie. So those endings were a little bit more, I don't know, just emotional.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think that people like to see that. Mystery stories can be just the mystery, but if you make a mystery story and your characters are lovable, it's a better story. It's a better book.
Yeah.
So when people tell me I really love Annie, then I know I have accomplished that, and that's what I look for.
Now, where do you think you're going to go? I'll ask you another question before I ask you that one. The 2 characters that I really loved were the twins, Amit and Yelda,
Okay.
in Secrets of the Fairy Chimneys. Where did they come
All
from,
right.
and where are they going?
Secrets in the Fairy Chimneys takes place in Turkey at an archaeological dig. How does Annie get to an archaeological dig? Well, by this time, Ty, her boyfriend, is a graduate student. And he is working with another main character in the book, an African-American young scientist who is trying to determine whether the bones that they find in the archaeological dig in Turkey have a connection to our ancestors, the bones found in like the Olduvai Gorge in Africa, where we believe that the human race came from. So they're doing this DNA study. And Annie is invited to come along as a school project. In other words, some schools require that kids do community service. Well, her school requires that she does this project. So that's how she gets involved. And of course, as soon as she gets there, there's mayhem. There's theft at the dig. She almost gets kidnapped. I mean, it starts right from the get-go, right in the airport. And so she gets to the archaeological dig, and there is a Turkish archaeologist in charge of the archaeological dig, and he has, for the summer, brought his twin children on board, and they are like 12 years old, and it's a boy and a girl, and they are very precocious. And where did they come from? They came from here. They came from my head. Most most of the stuff really comes from my head, but I really believe that as you go through life, you store. You store all this stuff that you're observing. A good writer is also a good reader and a good observer. And I think it's all stored in there, and then it comes out as something interesting.
Well, the twins certainly are.
So Ahmet and Yelda are really, they're a riot, and
They
they
are
will
funny,
show up.
yes.
I'm hoping to write the next Danny Tillery, and they will show up there as well.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I was going to ask you that question, where were they going to go from there? You mentioned that, a good writer has to be a good reader. I'm kind of interested in how the authors that you've read influence you, or what have they taught you?
Well, I think for me, when you write a book, you understand, when you write anything, you understand there are certain aspects of your writing that you should improve on. So obviously when you read a book, you admire the way a certain person writes. For instance, I'll use Stephen King as an example. I love Stephen King. I know you don't, but I love Stephen King. Not because he writes about vampires and ghouls and all this stuff, but because he makes his main characters so believable, and you want them to succeed. You become so involved with them, and he makes them so human. So that's something I'd like to copy. I'd like to make my characters human by, saying what flavor ice cream they like and how they feel about seeing a homeless person on the street, or, that kind of thing. So I think that authors can do that, or you just kind of subconsciously like a certain flow of words and whatnot, and you end up copying it.
What's interesting to me is you're a lot, and I'm throwing this question at you because we never even talked about it, but I'm really interested in it. Your descriptions are amazing. They're short and sweet, but they pinpoint. I'm thinking of the description of the Helmsley Palace in
Oh, no, the hotel
in the hotel, yeah.
in Girl with Pencil
Girl
Drawing.
with Pencil
Yeah, well,
Drawing, right.
the girls, Annie befriends her. Girl with Pencil Drawing is a story about art forgery, and Annie gets a series of art lessons, and she has an instructor, and she befriends the instructor, and they are trying to solve the mystery of, there's actually a murder in the book, and this art forgery ring, and they are invited to a lecture at the Helmsley Palace Hotel. And so they have to get all dressed up, which they don't ordinarily do, and they have to go to this hotel. So, I mean, you're a New Yorker.
Yep.
There's so much glitter in New York, and it's nice to talk about it.
But it's like I sort of knew, but I imagine there are plenty of people who read your books who aren't
Sure.
familiar with the settings at all.
Sure.
And you are able to make them they're succinct but very, very vivid.
Yeah, well, Girl with Pencil Drawing is like a love affair for New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes place there in Soho. There are scenes on the Brooklyn Bridge. It takes place also in Brooklyn, in Brooklyn Heights, which I love, and Central Park. And it's in the winter, so it's in snow the whole time. It's snowing all the time, which I love snow. And there's nothing more beautiful than New York in the snow, I think, except in the spring when everything's blooming. But that was my love affair with New York. And yeah, almost every book, all the books, I won't say almost, all the books that I write, the settings are like characters for me. They're places I love.
Yeah.
So.
We have about 3 minutes left. The last question I'd like to ask you is, it seems like it takes a great deal of work to put a book together. Can you talk a little bit about, tell us a little bit about the kinds of work that go into?
Well, first of all, you have to come up with an idea. Okay, you have to have a story. If and it's important to have that story. I work it out in my mind for a while. Then I start to take notes, okay? And for a mystery story, I have to choose a setting that I that I know or wish to research. I have to know what the crime is, and I have to know what the forensic science is. And then, of course, I have to interweave the characters into all of this in a way that makes them want to be there. You have to get that feeling that your characters really want to be there. And then comes the flow chart, chapter by chapter, and then I start writing the chapters. And I just write the chapters. Do I stick to the flow chart entirely? No, sometimes you get a better idea, or something just doesn't work out, and then you move that. Okay, so then you type a manuscript. I write on yellow pads, and then I type it, and that becomes my first edit. Then you really need an editor. You need a professional editor, and then you need to choose a publisher. And we'll get into that in the next show.
Yeah.
And you have to think about your audience and marketing. So the most important thing to me in making a book happen is you have to love your story. If you don't love your, this is a lot of work. You have to love the story and want to bring it to people. You have to be persistent. There are some authors who will say, well, you have to sit down and write 1,000 pages a day. I can't do that. My lifestyle just doesn't lend it. I will write 3 or 4 chapters in a day. Okay? So it's that persistence and patience, and eventually the child is born. And it's like having a baby. I mean, and then God forbid anybody says anything. But you have to think about things like writing reviews and stuff like that. So I hope that answers your question, because we're going to go into this in more detail in the next show.
The next one. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
This has been a wonderful thing for me, I have to tell you, because I've always wanted to pick an author's brain, and I get to do it.
Mary is a consummate English teacher.
Thank you.
A wonderful English teacher. We always love to talk about books and how they come about and the authors who write them. Yeah. And what's your favorite book, Mary?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Me too.
But I'm up there, but Lost Avenger's getting up there for me. I love that book.
Very good. You were paid to say that. Thanks so much.